Good evening. Welcome. My name is Shane Stark and I will be the moderator of tonight's forum. The League of Women Voters of Santa Barbara, together with our co-sponsors, League of Women Voters of Santa Maria Valley, AAUW, and the Future Leaders of America, and TVSB, is sponsoring tonight's forum, The Pros and Cons of the California State Propositions and Santa Barbara County Measures on the ballot for the November 8th election. We're coming to you from the TVSB studios. We hope this forum will inform you, the voters, of the issues and arguments on these important propositions or proposed laws. Note that the League does not support nor oppose any candidate or political parties. That's right, we have a critical election November 8th. You can check to make sure that your voter registration is up to date with your address, etc. being correct at voterstatus, one word, sos.ca.gov. If it all needs to be updated, you can re-register to vote at registertovoteca.gov. All registered voters in California will get a ballot in the mail. You should already have one. So be sure to register by the October 24th deadline so that you will receive your ballot packet. And most important, remember to vote. Thanks to Sylvia Uribe of Transil Pro, who will be providing simultaneous interpretation in Spanish this evening. Thanks also to TVSB for live streaming the forum on the League's Facebook page and videotaping it for later viewing on YouTube via the Santa Barbara League's website, lwvsantabarbara.org. Recordings of this forum in both English and Spanish will be posted on our website for later viewing. All of you are welcome to join the League and to make a tax-deductible contribution in order to finance voter education programs such as this. I'd like to introduce our team of presenters from the Santa Barbara League of Women Voters. They are Diane Black and Quinby Janes. They will be presenting today. It's Diane on my left. Together with our VP for Voter Services, Reve Moran, and our Vice President for Communications, Vicki Allen, our team put together this program. For a succinct summary of the issues in the state propositions, please see the pros and cons produced by the State League's Education Fund, available online at votersedge.org. This will give you a one-page summary of each proposition. Similarly, the slides that will accompany our program were produced by the California State League. We have a slide. We'll discuss there we go. We'll discuss the state propositions in the order they appear on the ballot, and then we'll briefly discuss our local measures in Santa Barbara County. Note the terms proposition and measures mean the same thing. The state ballot calls them propositions. Local ballots in Santa Barbara County refer to them as measures. We'll pause after each proposition or group propositions to answer questions. Please post your questions in the chat box at the bottom of the screen. Time permitting, we'll address them. Let's get started. Here's a slide. What are pros and cons? Voting on state propositions and ballot measures is serious business. You're enacting laws. Be careful and thoughtful. It's hard to change voter-approved laws. Read the official material in the ballot pamphlet. determine what the measure does and its estimated cost, evaluate economic and policy arguments for and against, and consider the alternatives. Discount ads, appeals to emotions, and unsupported claims. Check your facts and your claims from reliable online sources. Identify who is funding the campaigns and who stands to benefit if the propositions pass. And last, vote your principles. There are 7 propositions on the November 8th state ballot. Can you have the next slide? This is, I believe this is called word salad. Could use some dressing. Proposition 1 is a constitutional amendment put on the ballot by the legislature. It amends the state's Declaration of Rights to expressly protect reproductive freedom. 2 propositions would allow sports betting in California, which is now prohibited. Proposition 26 allows compacts between recognized Indian tribes and the state for additional gaming, including sports betting on tribal lands and at certain racetracks, horse racing tracks. Proposition 27 authorizes and regulates online sports betting outside tribal lands. Proposition 28 would require the state to set aside funds equal to 1% of the school's share of state tax revenue to pay for music and arts education in the public schools. Proposition 29 would require outpatient dialysis clinics to have on-site medical professionals and impose other requirements. Proposition 30 increases income tax on personal income above $2 million and dedicates the revenue to air pollution reduction of electric vehicle programs and wildfire prevention. Proposition 31 would ban the sale of flavored tobacco products in California. If you favor this ban, vote yes. If you oppose the ban, vote no. Quinn Janes, our Student League board member, will discuss Proposition 31 as well as Goleta Measure C 2022, a referendum on a city ordinance prohibiting the sale of flavored tobacco products in stores and vending machines. When we finish with the state propositions, we will briefly discuss the local measures. Besides the Goleta flavored tobacco referendum, there's an initiative zoning and general plan amendment in Carpinteria that Diane Black will discuss. We'll briefly identify the various school bond and tax measures proposed locally. Let's get started with Proposition 1. Here's the situation. The right to privacy, including reproductive freedom, is protected in the state constitution, but the right to abortion is not explicit. The Reproductive Privacy Act, which is in the Health and Safety Code, provides abortion of pre-viable fetus is a medical decision of the mother and the licensed health care provider. The United States Supreme Court in the Dobbs case overruled the federal right to abortion before viability, which was in the cases of Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, and left questions of abortion to the states. The legislature has proposed this constitutional amendment to declare a fundamental right to reproductive freedom, including the right to choose to have an abortion and to choose or refuse contraceptives. Because these rights are already protected by state law, Proposition 1 is unlikely to have any fiscal impact on California. Here are the arguments regarding Proposition 1. Supporters say that Proposition 1 will prevent California from going backwards on reproductive rights. It will further and protect existing laws. By putting the right to abortion and contraception directly into the California Constitution, reproductive health care will always be a medical decision, not a political one, no matter what party controls state government. Opponents say that Proposition 1 is unnecessary to protect reproductive rights in California. It is written so broadly that it could be interpreted to override state laws that now limit abortions after the point where a fetus is viable on its own outside the womb. These late-term abortions are currently only legal if the health or life of the mother is threatened. Vicki, has anyone submitted any questions about Proposition 1?
Have more cases, more deaths, and just general more impact.
Okay. But there is a question now. A question just came in the chat.
Thank you. Would you read it, please?
Yeah, of course. If Proposition 1 passes, would it override the Supreme Court decision in California?
No. It would establish, consistent with this Dobbs decision, that California as a state has made a legislative choice to establish a right to reproductive freedom, including the right to abortion. The Dobbs decision simply overrules Roe versus Wade, but it would not invalidate any state constitutional provisions.
Any other questions?
Are there other questions on Prop 1?
I was just going to say thank you. There are no further questions.
Thank you. Next, we have two propositions that concern sports betting. Propositions 26 and 27. At present, the state constitution prohibits gambling except as specifically permitted. Indian tribes, that is recognized federal Indian tribes, have the exclusive right to offer certain forms of gambling in California, including slot machines and certain card games. But sports betting, besides horse racing, isn't currently legal in California. The United States Supreme Court ruled that states could legalize sports betting in 2018, and 35 states, plus Washington, D.C., have done so. It is popular and lucrative. Americans bet more than $57 billion on sports in 2021. The expansion has created concern that gambling addiction will increase and that research on the long-term effects of legal sports betting is needed. A sports betting measure negotiated by California lawmakers in 2020 did not make the ballot, but two different sports betting initiative measures are on the ballot for the 2022 election. Next slide.
Yep, he's got it.
We'll take Proposition 26 first. Proposition 26 would allow in-person sports betting only at tribal casinos and horse racing tracks. There are 4 specific horse racing tracks that are named. Proposition 27 would allow online sports betting across the state except on tribal lands. If both pass, both could go into effect, but in all likely, a court will have to decide with respect to some provisions. May I have slide 9, please? Proposition 26 would amend the Constitution to allow tribal casinos in the state's 4 horse race tracks to offer in-person betting, sports betting. Only persons 21 or older could bet at racetracks. Terms including age restrictions on sports betting at tribal casinos would be negotiated by the governor and each tribe as part of the tribal compacts within the state. Tribal casinos could offer roulette and dice games, including craps. It taxes sports bets played at horse racing tracks. It doesn't tax tribes, which are considered sovereign nations, but it requires tribes to reimburse the state for the cost of regulating sports betting. Proposition 26 creates a new way of enforcing some gaming laws. It allows anyone to bring a lawsuit if they believe the laws are being violated and the state justice department declines to act. Any penalty or settlement money that results would go to the state. As for fiscal impact, Proposition 26 could generate tens of millions of dollars annually for the state. It's difficult to know the exact amount. New compacts might require tribes to pay more to local government, and it's unclear how much money will result from new private lawsuits. The revenue from Proposition 26 would be spent as follows. First, to meet the state's education spending commitments and regulatory costs. The remaining money would first go to problem gaming and mental health research, gaming enforcement rules, and then to the state's discretionary fund. Next slide, please. Proposition 26 supporters argue that it will increase tribal self-sufficiency by bringing more business to tribal casinos. Tribal casinos create jobs and help tribes pay for services like health care and education. Supporters also say it will protect against underage gambling by requiring people to be physically present to make bets and by prohibiting advertising to people under 21. They also say it will generate money for the state. Prop 26 opponents argue the new gaming law enforcement mechanism will be used by tribal casinos to sue competing card rooms and drive card rooms out of business. If that happens, they argue, it will lead to lost jobs and tax revenue, often in communities of color. Some casinos allow 18-year-olds to gamble, so opponents argue the initiative could lead young people to develop gambling addictions. They also argue it will revive the shrinking horse racing industry, which they say endangers horses. The other proposition that deals with online betting is Proposition 27. It concerns online and remote sports betting outside of tribal lands. Proposition 27 would allow licensed tribes and gaming companies to offer mobile and online sports betting for adults 21 and older outside Native American tribal lands. Gaming companies such as FanDuel and DraftKings could only offer sports betting if they reach an agreement with a tribe. The measure creates extremely high thresholds for gaming companies to do business in California, making it all but impossible for smaller gaming companies to compete. The proposition creates a new division in the state's Justice Department to regulate online sports wagering. That division could also decide whether to approve new forms of gambling, such as betting on awards and video games. I would point out there's a rather complex statute that accompanies the constitutional amendment, and it defines various terms, including what you can bet on. It also gives the Justice Department an additional powers to address illegal sports betting. The fiscal effects of Proposition 27 are estimated as follows. Net proceeds from online sports betting are taxed at 10%. Companies are exempted from other taxes on online betting. The state estimates tribes and gaming companies would pay fees and taxes up to several $100 million per year. The actual amount is uncertain in part. After covering the state's new regulatory costs, 85% of the money would be used to address homelessness and for gambling addiction programs, while 15% of the proceeds would go to Native American tribes that aren't involved in sports betting. The revenue does not go to the state general fund. It is not subject to the education share and is not the proceeds of taxes. Next slide. The proponents and supporters of Proposition 27 argue that Prop 27 creates a permanent source of funding to reduce homelessness. Every tribe can benefit, including tribes that decide not to offer sports betting. It protects against underage gambling with fines for violators and prohibits betting on youth sporting events. The opponents of Prop 27 argue Prop 27 turns every cell phone and computer into a gambling device. It escalates the risks of underage and problem gambling. It will drive business from tribal casinos. It threatens tribal sovereignty. Most of the money will go to companies in other states. It will not cure homelessness. It contributes nothing to the state general fund. It is too long and was drafted by the regulated community. I will pause for some questions about gaming propositions. Ask Vicky, has anyone posted any questions about Prop 26 or Prop 27?
Yes, there is a question. Would, would Prop 26 benefit California's Native American nations that do not run casinos?
With Prop 26?
Yes.
Not directly. Prop 26 to be effective requires that there be a gaming compact between the state and the tribe. It is possible that payments to non-gaming tribes could be negotiated or otherwise distributed to non-casino tribe, but the proposition itself does not do that.
Okay, there are no more questions.
Thank you. Next, we'll look at Proposition 28, an initiative statute that provides additional funding for arts and music education in the public schools. This will be presented by our Student League board member, Quimby Janes, by video. Over to you, Quimby.
The California Constitution requires a minimum percentage of the state budget to be spent on K through 14 education. The minimum guarantee is calculated annually. The state law requires instruction in visual and performing arts for grades 1 through 6. Schools must offer grades 7 through 8 art classes either during or after school. High school students must take either a year of art, a foreign language, or career and technical education to graduate. Most California high schools require students to take art. When school district budgets are cut during economic downturns, such as COVID, arts and music programs are often first to be downsized. So Proposition 28 is intended to turn the arts into a core subject area along with math, science, reading, English, etc. So here's the proposal. Proposition 28 would require the state to set aside an additional 1% of education funds beyond the annual education guarantee for music, arts, education in public schools. So more funding is allocated to schools serving many low-income students, and larger schools must spend 80% of funds on new staff and 20% on training and supplies. So the estimated fiscal effect for this proposition is an increase of $1 billion in state expenditures above existing constitutional requirements. So the supporters of Proposition 28 argue that art and music are necessary aspects for critical thinking and education preparedness, and they should definitely be considered a fundamental part of primary education. Additionally, arts and music instruction could help address the mental health crisis facing California's youth as they recover from the pandemic. Proposition 28 also has a strong support from teachers unions, as the arts funding is expected to generate lots of jobs for educators, which is a big deal coming out of COVID. Additionally, Fender Musical Instruments donated more than $1 million to the campaign, so that's a huge argument for supporters. And then Fender CEO Andy Mooney said that the company has donated more than 10,000 guitars to Los Angeles Unified and hopes Prop 28 will allow Fender to donate instruments to other districts. There was no argument submitted against Proposition 28. Opponents argue, though, that it would limit funds available for other purposes. That is, this ballot box budgeting and the allocation of school funding should be left to school districts. Also, if you reallocate those funds to the arts, like what happens to the STEM and other departments that aren't the arts.
Thanks, Quimby. Vicky, has anyone posted any questions about Prop 28 and school funding?
K through 14 education.
Ask Vicky.
I'm sorry, I was muted. There are no questions.
Thanks, Vicky. Could we have slide 20? Here we go. Next one. Next one. Thank you. Proposition 29 is an initiative statute that relates to requirements for kidney dialysis clinics. It's the third such initiative in recent years and is related to controversy between a healthcare workers union and the two largest dialysis clinics in California. People with end-stage kidney disease need dialysis to survive. Two companies own the majority of outpatient dialysis clinics, licensed by the State Department of Public Health. Most dialysis is paid for by Medicare and Medi-Cal at fixed rate close to the treatment cost. Private insurance also covers dialysis at higher negotiated rates. Proposition 29 would require that a licensed medical proposal must be on site at all times during dialysis. Telehealth may be used for up to 1 year if no such person is available. Clinics must disclose names of doctors with more than 5% interests in a clinic. Clinics must report information about dialysis-related infections among patients. Clinics cannot discriminate among patients based on the source of payment. And clinics must get permission from the state to close or reduce clinic hours. The estimated cost is that the clinics will pay more for staff salaries. Local governments may pay more in health costs if clinics close and patients go to more expensive facilities, or if clinics negotiate higher reimbursement rates. The supporting arguments for Prop 29 are dialysis companies do not invest enough in patient care and safety despite being highly profitable. The hours-long process of removing blood, filtering it, and returning it to the body leaves patients vulnerable to medical complications. Having a physician or nurse practitioner, in addition to current staff, available at all times could help reduce hospitalizations. And reporting requirements would increase transparency in the dialysis business. Proposition 29 opponents say the measure is unnecessary as clinics already provide quality care and have the needed staff to treat and monitor people. Patients may also reach their nephrologists via telemedicine if needed. Clinics already report infection data to the federal government. These new requirements could result in dangerous consequences, adding physicians would increase costs for clinics, pushing some to potentially reduce hours or close. Vicki, has anyone posted any questions about Prop 29?
I'm giving people a few minutes, but there are no questions.
Thank you.
Wait.
We'll handle
There's a question.
late-breaking questions.
There is a question. What healthcare professional levels are currently required on site when dialysis is underway?
I'm not sure of the exact level, but it does not require a physician. They are required to have professional staff on site at all times, but I'm not quite sure of the level. I think primarily this is done by physicians' assistants and registered nurses, if I'm not correct, and they have doctors on call. And I believe that in many cases the doctors, the clinics are at the highest level and are owned by doctors.
Okay. There are no more questions.
Thank you. Proposition 30 is an initiative statute that provides funding for programs to reduce air pollution and prevent wildfires by increasing tax on personal income above $2 million. Diane Black will discuss this measure.
Thank you, Shane. California is currently in a severe drought and is experiencing increasingly devastating wildfires and poor air quality. Gas-powered cars and wildfire smoke are the two largest sources of greenhouse gases. State law currently requires California to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 to 40% of 1990 levels, and by 2050 to 80% of 1990 levels. Ride-sharing fleets are required to log 90% of their miles with zero emissions vehicles by 2030. The state has recently committed $10 billion over the next 5 years on zero emissions vehicles. The state now spends between $2 and $4 billion annually on wildfire response. Proposition 30, the Clean Cars and Clean Air Act, or the income tax on millionaires for electric cars, proposes to increase income tax by 1.75% on personal income above $2 million. Net revenue is allocated to two zero emissions vehicle programs and wildfire response. 45% of the money would go to help buy new zero emissions vehicles. 35% would be used for charging stations, and 20% would be for wildfire response and prevention, with a priority to fund new firefighters. Half of the zero emissions vehicle funds are to benefit low-income and disadvantaged communities. The proposition would generate between $3.5 and $5 billion in most years, $2.8 to $4 billion for zero emissions vehicles, and $700 million to $1 billion for wildfire response. State and local fire protection costs could be reduced, but it's difficult to predict by how much. Supporters of Proposition 30 argue existing programs are inadequate to address the state's poor air quality, largely caused by car exhaust and wildfire smoke. Proposition 30 will make zero emissions vehicles more affordable and create green jobs. Proposition 30 will fund critically needed programs to prevent wildfires and protect homes. The major funder supporting Proposition 30 is Lyft. It is supported by the California Democratic Party and other air quality and trade groups. Opponents of Proposition 30 argue that Californians are already spending $50 billion on climate investment, including $10 billion for zero emissions vehicles. They argue there is no guarantee that Proposition 30 will make zero emissions vehicles affordable. They argue that Proposition 30 locks income tax funds into special interest funding. And finally, that California income taxes are already too high, and this proposition would cause people to move to lower tax states. The proposition is opposed by Governor Newsom, who criticized Lyft for sponsoring it, saying it's a cynical scheme devised for a single corporation to funnel state income tax revenues to their company. Vicki, has anybody posted any questions about Proposition 30?
Excuse me. Yes, there is a question.
Okay.
Is it 2% or 1.75% for people with incomes over 2 million?
It's 1.75%.
Great, thank you. And it looks like that's the only question.
Great.
Thanks, Diane.
Okay.
The last proposition on the state ballot is Prop 31. This is a referendum on Senate Bill 793, a 2020 state law that would prohibit the retail sale of flavored tobacco products. Quimby James will discuss this proposition as well as the local ordinance banning the sales of flavored tobacco products in the city of Goleta, Measure C. Quimby?
This is for Proposition 31. So the legislature passed Senate Bill 793 in 2020, and this law banned the sale of all flavored tobacco products. This includes pods for vape pens, methanol cigarettes, and chewing tobacco, but it was not a ban on hookahs or premium cigars. So the federal courts have ruled that local governments may adopt ordinances that ban the sale of tobacco products. So a referendum petition qualified for the ballot and suspended SB 793. So a yes vote on Proposition 31 means SB 793 will go into effect, and a no vote means that SB 793 will not go into effect. The estimated fiscal effects of Prop 31 are as follows. So last year, California tobacco taxes raised about $2 billion. These funds are mostly used for healthcare programs, etc. And SB 793 would decrease state tobacco tax revenues estimated from $10 million to $100 million annually. The wide range of estimates is because tobacco consumer reaction, switch or quit, is really uncertain. Switch or quit is really uncertain. The impact on state and local government healthcare costs is pretty much unknown. Reduced tobacco use may reduce costs, but longer lifespan could increase healthcare costs in the longer run. So supporters of Proposition 31 argue that Prop 31 will reduce smoking rates, especially in youth. It will protect youth by ending the sale of seductive candy-flavored products, because candy-flavored products are really directed towards the younger generations, which kind of increases this addiction. It also prevents big tobacco from methanol cigarette sales that disproportionately harm Black communities. The opponents of Proposition 31 argue that it's just simply prohibition of tobacco sales to adults, that it will drive tobacco sales into the illegal market, and it will also drive users towards more harmful products. It's important to note for Goleta voters, so Goleta Measure C is a referendum on a city law banning the retail sale of flavored tobacco products in the city of Goleta specifically. The Goleta ban is actually really, really similar to the state ban, which is Proposition 31, and applies to stores and vending machines within the Goleta city limits. So Measure C is consistent with Prop 31. If Prop 31 fails, but Measure C passes, the ordinance will go into effect under the city's police power, but could be challenged as it would lack state authority. But the city of Goleta has the power to do this. A Goleta voter who likes the ban should vote yes on C, on Measure C for Goleta, but a voter who does not like the ban should vote no on C.
Thanks, Quimby. Go earwigs. That's an earwiggle for those of you who didn't know. Are there any questions about the state or Goleta flavored tobacco bans?
There are no questions in the chat.
Thank you. That concludes our presentation on the state propositions on the ballot. At the slide 32, please. That's a dog. I do not know why the State League of Women Voters of California chose to end the program on the state propositions with what appears to be a highly nervous dog. In any event, we also would like to discuss another measure. We've discussed one of the measures on the local ballots. Diane will discuss Carpinteria Measure T, an initiative general plan and zoning amendment. Diane?
Thanks, Shane. Measure T concerns 2 parcels in downtown Carpinteria at 499 Linden Avenue, one of which is developed with a beach parking lot and is the site of a proposed hotel, and the other an undeveloped parcel across the railroad tracks. The parcels are both owned by the city of Carpinteria. One is designated general commercial and proposed for the hotel, and the other is designated for open space recreation. This initiative would change the general plan designation to open space recreation with a residential overlay on the hotel site, and would readopt the open space recreation designation on the other parcel. The zoning would also be changed to recreation. If Measure T passes, the Surfliner Inn, the hotel that is proposed for the site, including construction of a parking lot, would not be possible. The measure would also redefine the open space recreation designation to include existing parking lot as an allowed use on all parcels designated open space recreation. This could be read to restrict new parking on open space recreation parcels within the city of Carpinteria. This measure is contested. Those in favor and opposed to the measures have websites. And according to their websites, the supporters of Measure T say it will save public land from private development, maintain the small town downtown charm of Carpinteria, preserve downtown mountain views, protect finite water supplies, and maintain the look and feel of the south entrance of the downtown T. According to their website, opponents of Measure T say it will upend the local decision-making process, threaten protection for open space, dramatically slow down improvements of the downtown T, allow housing to be built on land designated for open space, and prohibit important downtown improvements and limit the ability to upgrade public parks, including parking.
Thanks, Diane. Vicki, are there any questions about Measure T?
I'm just unmuting. No, I'm here. There are no questions, but I do have a question from someone in the chat who wants to know if there will be an opportunity to ask questions about previously discussed measures.
I don't see why not, so long as we have time remaining.
Okay.
That would be appropriate.
There's nothing on Measure T that I see.
Okay, we have a few local tax and bond measures that I would go through, and then we can address any residual questions that are left. How does that sound? That's good. I'm talking to myself. I think it was that dog that was on. Just got to me. Here's some basic advice. There are a number of local tax and school district measures submitted for voter approval. We'll briefly discuss them before we go. Here's our basic advice on how you evaluate a tax or a bond measure. For a special tax, that's a tax that's devoted to a particular purpose, or a bond, look at 1, the proposed use for the money and the plan for how it is to be spent. There's usually a separate section in the bond measure that details exactly how the proceeds will be spent. I believe it's required by state law. Ask, is the tax necessary to fund the things that it proposes? Are there alternatives? Look at the burden of the tax. Who pays it? How much? And for how long? Evaluate the cost, the principal plus interest of any debt, and how it is repaid. Look at the effect of the measure on the total tax and debt burden of the entity. What will happen if the tax does not pass? And again, how will the tax money be used? Noting that the purpose of a special tax limits its use. A general tax may be used for any lawful purpose of the entity that adopts it. In addition to the things we talked about just recently, the burden and benefit of the tax and whether the entity needs the revenue, ask, do you trust the government to use the funds wisely, and is there adequate oversight for how the government spends the money? There's only one special tax on the ballot this year. The other local tax measures are general taxes. Special taxes need a 2/3 voter approval to pass. General taxes need majority voter approval. Goleta City Measure B is a general transaction and use tax. It is 1%, adds a new tax, 1% of sales receipts, raising the rate from the current county rate of 7.75% to 8.75%. The City Council has identified a separate wish list of potential uses for the proceeds. There are numerous beneficial purposes identified, but a wish list is not a financial commitment, and sales tax funds could be used for any lawful public purpose. The proponents of Measure B point to a number of things that require additional funds to be completed, particularly road repairs, implementation of the Creeks Restoration Plan, and renovation of the Goleta Community Center. Opponents of Measure B contend that the taxes are already too high in a bad economy and that the sales tax will hurt people of modest means particularly hard. The City of Guadalupe, Measure Z, proposes to increase its transient occupancy tax, or TOT, from 6% to 10%, and to expand the definition of hotel, which is what the tax applies to include short-term rentals, campsites, and RV parks. The City of Lompoc, Measure X, transient occupancy tax, is a special tax that imposes a 1% tax for public safety, 65% for police, 35% for fire, above the current 10% TOT. This needs a 2/3 vote. And last, the City of Solvang Measure U transactions and use tax imposes a 1% general tax on sales receipts. It needs majority approval. There are a number of school district measures on the ballot. All these measures are facilities construction bonds. They need 55% voter approval and must comply with accountability requirements under state law. The sole exception here is the Hope School District parcel tax. This needs 2/3 voter approval. The measures are the Buellton Union School District, Measure R, General Obligation Bond, $8.8 million facilities bond. College School District, Measure Y, General Obligation Bond, a $23 million facilities bond. Guadalupe Union School District has 2 bonds. Measure V, General Obligation Bond, $8.5 million to bond for a new junior high, and Measure W, General Obligation Bond, $8.49 million facilities upgrade bond. The Hope School District has a parcel tax, Measure S, education parcel tax, to provide high quality education. This is a renewal of the parcel tax. $79 per parcel for 5 years. This requires a 2/3 vote. And last, the Lompoc Union School District Measure A General Obligation Bond, $125 million facilities bond. Are there any questions about local taxes or bonds?
There are not. There are no questions.
Why don't we return to the questions that you have in the bank that we have not previously answered?
Yes. Let's see. Oh, okay. I found it. Would Prop 26 encourage Native American nations that do not currently run casinos to start doing it?
That's hard. That's hard to say whether it would encourage them. A tribe that is currently federally recognized and it does not operate a casino might have an incentive to seek a compact with the state. What the likelihood is of their actually getting a new compact with the state is speculative. So they might try. First, if they're not federally recognized, they have to go through the process of becoming federally recognized before they'd be eligible for a compact. Then they'd have to negotiate with the state.
Okay, thank you. There is one more question on a different proposition. Prop 29. What do the majority of dialysis patients say about this measure?
I don't know how you quantify it. There are, I think, advertisements, televised advertisements for both sides of this that have dialysis patients as paid spokesmen. I don't know how you quantify what the polls are saying about how patients feel about it. I think they'll choose based on what they think will give them the best treatment. I would assume that.
Right. There's another question on another prop. This is Prop 28. What is the source of funding for this measure?
Oh,
for
that in year one, the legislature will have to appropriate from the general fund, the state general fund, an amount that is equal to 1% of education's share of state tax revenue, and put that in a particular fund, and that would be repeated each succeeding year, 1% of whatever the state share is. So they'd have to seed it 1 year, and then on it would basically be an additional 1% of state general fund revenue on top of whatever they would have to pay the schools for their general proceeds of taxes. I hope that wasn't too confusing. It's very confusing, but that's a simplified version of what they're doing. It actually adds a percent to the school share, and it varies each year by what the school share is.
Thank you. Another question. This is Prop 30. Please expand on Governor Newsom's objection to this measure. Why does he think that only one company benefits?
I think he really focused on Lyft and the benefits Lyft would have because they are the major funder of Prop 30. And so I think that's why he focused on them. I don't think he believes that they would be the only people to benefit, but they obviously have a very significant interest in getting the proposition passed to help their business. Do you have something you want to add?
No, they have. My understanding is that the rideshare companies, they have to make their fleet all electric by a not too distant time in the future.
90%.
90%
by
electric.
2030.
That's a big big percentage, so I would imagine would involve a substantial outlay by
Right.
hell, anybody with a big fleet. That's it.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions.
We're good. I think we can close now. Thanks to Translate Pro for translation services, our co-sponsors, AAUW, Future Leaders of America, the Santa Maria Valley League of Women Voters, and TVSB, as well as all the volunteers of the League who helped put together this forum. Particular thanks to the League of Women Voters of California Education Fund for the slide deck and the pros and cons. Information about the election is available on Voters Edge. Maybe the last slide. There you go. On Voters Edge. Thanks to those who have listened to this forum. We hope you found the program informative and useful as you prepare to vote. Finally, please make sure you are correctly registered to vote and vote. Your vote matters. Mail-in ballots have already been sent. You can mail them or drop them off at designated places. You can contact the elections office, the Santa Barbara County Elections Office. If you haven't received the ballot, I'll give you the phone number, 800-722-8683. That's 800-722-8683. Be sure to sign your ballot before you return it. Make sure it is postmarked by November 8th, 2022. Again, the information, all the permutations about where you can drop off your ballot, etc., or vote in person if you choose, will be included in the packet that you get with your ballot. From all of us at the League of Women Voters, good evening, and thank you for helping us make democracy work. Vote!